Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a stack of source material here, excerpts from a document titled Cleopatra.pdf, and our mission in this deep dive is to pull out the most important bits of knowledge, the real insights.
Exactly. We want to get you really well informed, not just about Cleopatra herself, but the whole world she lived in. It was pretty complex.
Yeah, and what's interesting about these sources, they don't just jump straight to her.
No, they really set the stage first.
Yeah.
You get this detailed picture of ancient Egypt, its incredible geography, the Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled for ages,
Alexandria.
that powerhouse city.
Right. And it introduces some key Romans and how they started interacting with Egypt before Cleopatra becomes the main focus.
So think of this deep dive as getting the foundations right, understanding the landscape, the rulers, the society, the Roman influence building up.
And all based only on what's in this particular source material we have here.
Okay, let's jump in then. Where does it start?
Right away, it talks geography. Calls Egypt the most physically remarkable country on the globe. Remarkable seems like an understatement based on this description. It paints this picture of a long, thin valley, super fertile.
What, incredibly isolated?
Yeah, that's the wild part. Completely surrounded by deserts, and the source claims these deserts are actually more impassable than seas.
Talk about natural insulation. It really frames Egypt's whole existence as this extraordinary phenomena.
Something totally dependent on very specific things about rain. General laws, but specific results.
Which is weird, because then it says Egypt itself is basically a rainless region.
Right. Even though you'd think it'd be wetter closer to the equator.
It gets into the why. It says rain falls when air cools down, like going over mountains or mixing with cooler air.
Okay.
But air moving from cold places to warm plains gets thirsty for moisture. Acts like a drying wind.
Ah, okay, that explains the desert surrounding it. And the source contrasts this, doesn't it?
It does. You've got places like the Amazon, too hot, too wet, impenetrable jungle, teeming with life, but man is almost excluded.
Or the other extreme, truly rainless areas, just silence, emptiness, death.
Exactly. No plants, no animals, just vast wastes of sand and rock, like the Sahara or Arabia Deserta. Man's hopelessly excluded there, too.
And yet, in the middle of this huge rainless zone in Africa and Asia, which is mostly flat,
there's the Nile Valley, the single big interruption to all that barrenness.
So this valley, it's like 5 to 10 miles wide, almost flat for nearly 2,000 miles.
Running from that distant rainy area where tropical showers do fall, all the way north to the sea, with just a gentle current.
And this geography leads to the famous inundation.
Yeah, the annual flood. All that rain from way south makes the Nile swell and cover the whole valley. It becomes this huge, shallow, muddy lake.
5 to 10 miles wide, maybe 1,000 miles long.
Something like that. And it takes months for the water to go back down.
The result being this rank and luxuriant vegetation, though the source notes it's now wholly regulated and controlled by the hand of man.
But it speculates about how it must have been originally in its primeval state.
The idea is that only plants that could handle being underwater for months would grow.
Right. Which likely prevented big forests or lots of wild animals from taking hold.
And this leads to a pretty striking claim in the source.
It really is. The idea that nature itself formed and preserved the valley specifically for this special possession of man, like it was held in reserve.
Keeping out stuff that would make it hard for humans to move in and settle.
Yeah, it even suggests if humans left for 1,000 years, they could come back and find it ready. No jungles or fierce beasts to clear out first.
Nature as the husbandman, the farmer, using the sea, the sun, the mountains, the rains.
It's quite a poetic way to put it, describing the whole system as nature's machinery.
Then moving north towards the sea, we get the delta.
That fertile land built up by the river deposits. Low-lying country.
So low, the source says, it almost looks like part of the sea when you approach by ship. But it's covered in fields and villages.
And sailors wouldn't see the green fields first. They'd see treetops, obelisks, pillars.
Looking like they're just growing apparently out of the water. That's a cool image.
The document mentions two main mouths of the Nile here. The Pelusiac branch on the east.
Near Pelusium, that sounds important.
It was. A key frontier city, the first place you'd hit, coming overland from the east. And then the Canopic mouth, way over on the west.
And the coast between them. About 100 miles.
Yeah, and described as really difficult. Irregular, shallow, sandbanks everywhere.
Yeah.
Creeks, lagoons.
A constant battle, it says, an eternal war between the river bringing sand down and the sea pushing it back.
Making the whole coast dangerous and hard to get to.
So you add that difficult coast to the deserts all around.
And you get this picture of ancient Egypt being incredibly isolated and secluded, as the source puts it.
And the argument is this isolation let it develop its own way for ages under native kings. Peaceful, industrious people, famous scholars.
And that's the connection the source makes. Geography enabling a unique, long-lasting civilization.
Okay, so that's the land. Then the source turns to the rulers who came after those native kings, the Ptolemies.
Right, the Ptolemaic dynasty, ruled for almost 3 centuries, 13 rulers in total. And it's quite the contrast presented here.
How so?
Well, the founder set an honorable example, apparently. But what followed was, according to this source, extreme degeneracy and debasement.
Ouch. Strong words.
Yeah. It says, successive rulers just lived for their sensual propensities and passions. They might start okay, but ended up showing reckless and intolerable cruelty.
Any specifics?
It calls out incest specifically. Says they picked it up from Asiatic nations and it led to awful consequences.
And why does the source dwell on this? Just historical gossip?
No, it makes a point of saying this is crucial for understanding the domestic influences on Cleopatra herself.
Ah, so her background.
Exactly. It argues that her privileges, her advantages, but especially the evil influences she grew up around, need to be very seriously taken into the account when we judge her later actions.
So it's not making excuses, but providing context.
Pretty much. And it's blunt. It says mothers of rulers like Oyites, that's Cleopatra's father, and other princesses, were typically ambitious, selfish, unnaturally cruel, disregarded virtue, family ties.
Not exceptions, but the norm in that court.
That's the claim. It even gives this horrifying example. Soldiers cutting off a woman's hands before killing her in a temple, and her screaming these awful imprecations.
Grim stuff. But then, doesn't the source say something contradictory about the government?
Yes. This is fascinating. Despite these, frankly, terrible rulers, the source states the Ptolemaic government was always been considered one of the most liberal, enlightened, and prosperous of ancient times.
Okay, wait, how? How is that even possible with cruel tyrants on the throne?
The explanation given is the separation between the rulers and the actual running of the country, the internal administration.
Like managing the economy, keeping order, justice.
Exactly. That stuff was apparently in the hands of capable, faithful ministers.
So the day-to-day government worked, even if the royals were misbehaving.
That's the idea. It allowed ordinary affairs and general routine of domestic and social life to carry on in very tolerable peace, prosperity, and happiness.
You still had the Nile floods, the farming.
Right. Constant busy industry across the land for 300 years. Tilled fields, sowing seed, managing the irrigation canals, an unchanging scene of smiling verdure and beauty.
And this leads the source to propose a kind of principle about society.
Yeah, a theory about vice. It states, vice in the social state is the incident and symptom of idleness.
Idleness breeds trouble. Where does it say idleness happens?
Mostly at the very top, the aristocracy, fixed wealth, nothing much to occupy their minds, so they turn to vicious pleasures. And also at the very bottom, people too low or degraded for regular work, leading to corruption.
So work is the cure.
The great remedy for vice is employment, it says. A virtuous community needs useful things for everyone to do.
And applying that back to Egypt.
While you had extreme and abominable wickedness in the palaces and courts, the zones of idleness,
The ministers doing the actual work and the ordinary people farming and trading, they kept the country running and relatively prosperous.
that's the argument. It's a really interesting take on how a state could function, or seem to function, despite its leadership,
Okay, so this productive land feeds into Alexandria.
which became a very great and busy city really fast after Alexander founded it. A huge commercial hub.
Because all that grain and produce coming down the Nile needed an export point.
Exactly. Via the Canopic branch, mostly. But the city wasn't right on the river mouth because of sandbanks.
Right, they put it on a strip of land nearby with deep water access.
Yes, and Alexander's engineers cut a canal to connect it directly to the Nile. Smart engineering for seamless river-to-sea trade.
You can just picture the activity described. Huge warehouses, granaries.
Ships flooding in from Syria, Asia Minor, Greece, Rome, trading their goods for Egypt's bounty.
The source paints a picture of the port. Ships coming and going, sailors singing while they work.
Yeah, loading and unloading boats, porters hauling goods, constant movement.
Although it does mention interruptions. King's guards showing up, warships, even civil wars between royals fighting over the throne.
True, but it also says these disruptions were usually few and short.
Why? What kept them from wrecking the place?
Another pragmatic point from the source: the rulers, even the bad ones, knew their money came from trade and agriculture.
Ah, don't destroy the thing you're fighting over.
Exactly. The peaceful population and private property were the very estate for which the combatants were contending. So self-interest meant sparing the productive parts of society as much as possible.
Makes sense. Now, Alexandria wasn't just commerce, right? The source talks about wonders, the pharaohs.
The famous lighthouse, a lofty tower, supposedly 400 feet high, known worldwide for centuries.
Built by the second Ptolemy, Philadelphus. And there's a story about the architect, Sostratus.
Yeah, a bit of ancient rivalry. Ptolemy wanted his name on it, big and prominent. Sostratus, the architect, wanted his name there.
So what did he do? The source says he got sneaky?
He did. Carved his own name deep into the marble base, then covered it up with plaster.
And put the king's name on the plaster.
Right. The idea was, over time, the plaster would crumble away, the king's name would vanish.
And Sostratus's name would be revealed underneath, lasting as long as the building did. Pretty clever.
Though the source adds, sadly, only useless and unmeaning ruins are left today.
And the other great wonder mentioned, the library and museum.
Another center of radiance and illumination. The museum wasn't for displaying oddities. It was a real university.
Learned men, philosophy, science, well-funded, grand buildings.
And the library was key to that. Started by the same king. They collected books by having scribes copy them onto parchment or papyrus.
Which was super expensive and slow work back then.
Very. And the Ptolemies were apparently ruthless collectors, according to this source.
Oh, so what did they do?
They'd grab original books from people or even whole cities, make copies for the owners, but keep the originals for Alexandria.
Wow, and they'd borrow books from travelers.
And just give back copies, keeping the originals. Talk about aggressive acquisition.
It grew huge, right? 400,000 volumes? Then expanded into the Serapean Temple.
Yeah, the Great Temple Complex dedicated to Serapis. That place was magnificent itself.
And Serapis, the source mentions a legend, ancient Egyptian god, but also a statue from Sinope.
Right. Sinope, the Alexandria of the North. Serapis was seen as a protector of sailors there.
So sailors spread his fame, and the first Ptolemy had a dream about getting that statue.
A vision, yeah. Told him to bring the Sinope statue to Alexandria, which, the source points out, was strategically brilliant.
How so?
Well, it appealed to two key groups. Rural Egyptians recognized an ancient god, and the maritime world, sailors and traders, revered this god of seamen.
Making Alexandria the religious center for them, which helped solidify its status as the main naval base. Smart.
But getting the statue wasn't easy. Ptolemy tried to buy it. Sinope refused for 2 years.
What changed their minds?
A famine hit Sinope, according to the source. They finally agreed to trade their god statue for a shipment of Egyptian corn.
Wow. A literal trade of deity for dinner.
Seems like it. Ptolemy sent the corn, got the idol, built the amazing temple for it.
The source has another story about library acquisitions, too, involving Jewish scriptures.
Right. An effort, maybe by Ptolemy or a minister, to get a copy of the sacred writings of the Jews.
But there was a complication, something about prisoners.
Yeah, the Egyptians had taken many Jewish people as slaves in earlier wars. They were scattered across Egypt, working fields, turning water wheels.
And the masters considered them property, having bought them from the government.
So the plan to get the Jewish community to cooperate with sharing their sacred texts involved a grand gesture.
What did they do?
Liberate all those Jewish slaves, free them, and send them back home to Judea.
Oh, just like that. Did they compensate the owners?
Yes, the source says they paid a very liberal sum for ransom. It even quotes figures from ancient historians mentioned in the text.
How many slaves and how much?
Around 120,000 slaves, freed for 600 talents. The source calculates this to about $600,000 total, which it points out is only about $5 per slave.
Still, a huge expense.
And the source emphasizes that was only a preliminary expense, just to get one set of books. It really shows the scale of the Ptolemies' ambition for that library.
Okay, so we have this picture. Amazing land, complicated rulers, a vibrant intellectual city. Now the Romans start showing up more prominently.
Right. The source brings in Ptolemy Auleus, Cleopatra's dad, needing Roman help when he was exiled.
And he meets Cato the Younger in Rhodes.
Yes, that encounter. Ptolemy expected royal treatment, but Cato, Well, Cato, it was Cato.
Yeah.
Stern Roman virtue.
What happened?
Cato basically sent a message back saying, I don't have business with you, but you can come see me if you have business.
Ouch. Did Ptolemy go?
He had to swallow his pride. He went, dressed in all his royal finery, huge entourage.
And Cato?
Plain clothes, simple room, didn't even get up, just pointed to a seat. The source highlights that stark contrast, Roman severity versus Eastern display.
Auletes did get back to power with Roman help eventually, right? Gabinius led the forces.
Yes, and crucially, Mark Antony was a young officer in that army.
And the source notes Antony was actually friends with Archelaus, the guy ruling Egypt at the time, Berenice's husband.
Friends, yes, but Antony fought against him anyway. Out of duty to Rome, the source says.
Antony led the charge across the desert to take Pelusium.
He did, leading the cavalry. The source mentions again how dangerous that desert crossing was for armies Egypt's shield. But Antony was eager for the glory, attracted by the danger.
Then the Romans marched through the Delta, fought battles, won, Archelaus killed, Berenice captured, passed Alexandria open.
And then boom, Roman civil war spills over. Caesar lands in Alexandria chasing Pompey.
Only to find Pompey has already been assassinated near Pelusium by Ptolemy's advisors.
Yeah, the source describes Pompey's murder and Caesar's arrival hitting Egypt like simultaneous claps of thunder. Total shock shifted everyone's focus instantly.
And Caesar didn't exactly arrive quietly.
No, he came in like he owned the place. Accustomed to absolute power, saw himself as monarch and master of the world. Just moved into the palaces, Roman symbols of authority everywhere.
Made demands immediately.
Yep. The money Ares had promised him 6,000 talents. And he claimed Rome, as executor of Ali's will, had the right to settle the fight between young Ptolemy and Cleopatra. Demanded Ptolemy plead his case to him.
How did Ptolemy's court react? Pothinus, the minister.
Pothinus resisted, but the source calls his methods weak and ignoble, stirring up petty quarrels, complaining about the food for Caesar's men, claiming poverty because of Caesar's exactions.
Trying to undermine Caesar's authority to judge the royal dispute, saying Ptolemy was sovereign.
Exactly. The source really contrasts Pothinus's mean and contemptible tactics with Caesar's bold, manly, and undies demands. It even says history has sort of sided with Caesar in feeling, looking back.
And meanwhile, Cleopatra needed to get to Caesar, which was tricky.
Very tricky. Ptolemy's army was between her and Alexandria. No army, no fleet for her. Dangerous journey.
However, she managed it, and the source doesn't detail that part here. She gets to Caesar, and when that becomes known,
all hell breaks loose in Alexandria. A general and violent tumult, the source calls it. Pothinus, Achilles the general. Ptolemy's supporters whipping up the crowds.
A mix of people angry about Cleopatra and Caesar, and maybe just people wanting a riot.
Probably. Against the Romans, against the palace. The source notes the main Egyptian army was still out of Pelusium, so this was mostly the city populace plus some guards.
And Caesar, small forces, but he didn't panic.
Nope. Went straight on the offensive. Sent his veteran soldiers to grab the young king Ptolemy.
Roman veterans versus a mob.
Yeah, the source says the veterans could handle pretty much anything against a crowd like that. They snatched Ptolemy, brought him to Caesar.
What did the crowd do then?
First, stunned. Then, furious. Caesar, now holding both Cleopatra and Ptolemy, tried to calm them down. Gave a speech from a high window.
What was his line?
Played the diplomat. Said he was only judging because their father's will appointed Rome. Not claiming power over their king. Just wanted to settle their civil war fairly. Told him to go home. Promised a good decision.
And his decision was?
Follow the will. Cleopatra and Ptolemy rule together. The younger siblings, Arsinoe and her brother, get Cyprus.
Did that satisfy Pothinus?
Not a chance. He saw his own power evaporating. Was determined to stop it. Caesar tried to smooth things over, planned festivals.
But then Achilles, the general, shows up with the main army from Pelusium.
Yeah, things escalated fast. Caesar sent negotiators, important Egyptians, hoping Achilles would listen to them.
Did he?
Nope. Achilles had them seized and killed. One survived, wounded, but the message was clear. War was on.
So Caesar had to dig in, fortify the palace area.
Exactly. Barricaded streets, fortified gates, sent out urgent calls for backup from Roman forces in Syria, Cyprus, Rhodes. It became a siege.
And somewhere in here, Pothinus gets executed by Caesar.
Yes, the source mentions the execution of that great ruling minister. Then another character pops up, Ganymede, Arsinoe's officer.
Right. He was in on Pothinus's plots, fled when Pothinus was killed, took Arsinoe with him, and joined Achilles' army.
And apparently caused trouble there, too. Stirred up dissension, challenged Achilles' command.
During the siege, the Egyptians tried cutting off Caesar's water supply.
Yeah, they diverted seawater into the channels supplying the palace district. A nasty tactic.
But Caesar had a counter.
He did. Ordered his men to dig wells right there. The source notes you can usually find fresh water near the coast if you dig deep enough.
And it worked.
Found abundant fresh water. Huge relief for his troops. Thwarted that plan.
How did young Ptolemy die? The source mentions his death.
It happened during an assault, presumably by Caesar's forces breaking out or attacking. Egyptian soldiers panicked on the ramparts, fled, fell into a ditch.
Creating a bridge of bodies.
Gruesome, yeah. Others trampled over them. Survivors tried to escape across the river in a boat, overloaded it, and it sank.
And Ptolemy was among them.
His body washed ashore later, identified by his royal armor, his cuirass.
So after all that fighting, Ptolemy dead, Cleopatra is sole ruler.
Yes. And the source describes the cleanup. Repairing buildings damaged by fire and fighting, rebuilding bridges, reopening canals, clearing debris.
Restoring the city, but not the library.
Ah, yes. The great tragedy. The source calls the library fire during the fighting a catastrophe. Burning ships driven ashore set fire to adjacent buildings.
And destroyed the main part of the Great Library,
Right.
the 400,000 manuscripts.
The largest part, yes. Described as the only general collection of the ancient writings that ever had been made. A loss never repaired, the source states bleakly.
Did Cleopatra try to rebuild it?
She made an effort, the source says. Repaired the buildings, collected maybe 100 or 200,000 new manuscripts later on.
But it wasn't the same.
Never regained the fame or scope of the original. A truly devastating blow to ancient knowledge as presented here.
Okay, so Caesar wins, Cleopatra rules. Caesar goes back to Rome. How is Cleopatra viewed there?
The source says Rome wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat for her. Vice was common enough in Rome, but her particular brand of wickedness was too conspicuous, apparently.
And her sister Arsinoe, what happened to her?
Caesar brought her back as a prisoner, a trophy for his triumph parade, kept her in Rome while he finished his other conquests.
Tell us about these Roman triumphs. Big deals, right?
Huge deals. Decreed by the Senate for major victories, Caesar combined his wins in Gaul, Egypt, Asia, and Africa into one massive 4-day spectacle.
Processions, prisoners, loot.
Endless trains of them, captive princes and princesses like Arsinoe, wild animals. Generals aimed for the most impressive captives and plunder.
And Arsinoe walked in the Egyptian part, in chains.
Yes, before Caesar's chariot. Though the source makes a point of saying her chains were gold, supposedly in honor of her rank. Still, chains.
But the source suggests this display kind of backfired on Caesar.
It does, offers a critique. Says Caesar's pride and vainglory made the triumphs too spectacular. Seeing Arsinoe paraded like that apparently renewed criticism against Caesar rather than just impressing people.
Interesting. Any other examples of Caesar's excesses causing problems?
Oh, yeah. The feasts and public spectacles after the triumphs spent enormous sums from his plunder.
Please the crowds, maybe.
Some of them. But the better part of Roman society was apparently disgusted by the waste and extravagance. The whole city became a scene of riot and debauchery. People suspected he must have used extreme and lawless extortion to pay for it all.
And the combats he put on, gladiators, beasts.
Romans loved those. Caesar staged them on a most magnificent scale. He seemed to think the more horrific the fight, the more people would enjoy it.
How horrific are we talking?
The source gives one example. A land battle staged with 500 foot soldiers, 20 elephants, and 30 horsemen on each side.
Whoa. That's not a spectacle, that's a massacre.
Exactly. The source compares it in size to the Battle of Lexington, but likely 10 times the slaughter. And the reaction?
Too much.
Way too much. Too much even for the populace, it says. Caesar crossed a line where butchery stopped being entertainment. People were shocked. Right. Added condemnations of Caesar's cruelty to the other complaints against him.
So from Caesar's missteps, the source then turns to Mark Antony's flaws.
Yeah, shifts focus to Antony's character and his own public excesses. Notes that even with his high rank and power, his behavior was very loudly and very generally condemned.
Like what? What did he do?
Spending nights carousing, showing up in public staggering drunk, even presiding over official duties while intoxicated.
Not a good look.
Not at all. And traveling openly with undesirable companions. An actress named Cytheride is mentioned, hauling huge amounts of fancy plates and furniture for lavish roadside banquets.
Why? Just to show off?
Pretty much. To make men wonder at his luxury, the source says, he apparently got a kick out of doing strange and extraordinary things to excite surprise.
Like harnessing lions to his wagon.
Exactly like that. It paints Antony as flamboyant, excessive, maybe insecure, definitely not adhering to traditional Roman virtues.
Which sets the scene perfectly for Cleopatra, their famous meeting.
Precisely. The source describes her sailing to meet him at Tarsus, on the river Cydnus,
Yeah.
after some kind of initial contact or embassy, presumably.
And her arrival wasn't exactly low-key.
Understatement of the year. She arrives on this incredible barge. Finest craftsmanship, gilded all over, purple sails, oars tipped with silver.
And her presentation.
She's lounging under a canopy woven with gold, dressed as the goddess Venus, surrounded by boys dressed as cupids fanning her, girls as nymphs and graces.
Music, too.
Oh yeah, flutes, lyres, viols playing, guiding the rhythm for the oarsmen. The sound carried far across the water.
It sounds like something out of a dream, a vision of enchantment, the source calls it.
It drew massive crowds from the city and countryside. Everyone rushed to the riverbank to see this spectacle.
So many people that Antony was left sitting alone at his official tribunal.
That's the story. Everyone abandoned him to go see her barge.
What was Cleopatra's first move when she actually arrived?
Antony invited her to dinner. Standard procedure, maybe.
But she refused.
She did. Said it was more proper that he should come and sup with her. And she expected him at her tents that evening. Bold move.
And Antony go.
He went. And the source says he was completely blown away by the reception she put on.
What was it like?
Her tents and pavilions were lit up in this ingenious and beautiful manner. Surprisingly brilliant. Amazing food, wine, gold and silver everywhere. Magnificent decorations and clothes. Just a scene of bewildering enchantment.
Could Antony top that the next day?
He tried to host her, but nope. Failed to match her display. The source says he flat out admitted he was completely outdone.
So what was Antony's reaction to Cleopatra herself, beyond the spectacle?
The source is very clear here. He was perfectly fascinated. Yes, by her beauty, her wit, her accomplishment.
But something more.
Yes. It emphasizes that above all, he was captivated by her tact, her skill, her sheer confidence, her adroitness, it says, in assuming at once so boldly and carrying out so adroitly the idea of her social superiority over him.
So she wasn't just beautiful, she took command of the situation, and he was hooked.
Instantly. He yielded his heart almost immediately to her undisputed sway. That's how the source puts it. It was her presence, her command, as much as anything else.
Fascinating. Does the source give any anecdotes about their time together, that winter in Alexandria?
It does. Little stories that give a flavor of their life. There's one about a medical student named Philotas.
What did he say?
He visited the palace kitchens and saw Antony's cook roasting. Wait for it. 8 wild boars.
8? For one dinner?
That's what Philotas wondered. The cook explained they had to prepare multiple suppers. Antony and Cleopatra would get caught up in some new turn of their diversions, lose track of time, and by the time they were ready to eat, the first meal was cold, so they needed a fresh one ready to go.
Wow. Give you a sense of their lifestyle. Spontaneous, maybe a bit decadent.
Definitely. There's another story involving Antony's son, young Antony, from his marriage to Fulvia. He was in Alexandria too.
And imitating his father's extravagance.
Seems so. Philotas, the medical student, was at young Antony's dinner table one night, and there was this physician there who was apparently very talkative and full of himself.
Annoying dinner guest.
Right. So Philotas, wanting some peace, hit him with a logic puzzle. A syllogism about giving cold water to patients with ague or fever.
Let me guess, it was flawed logic.
Exactly. The quote is, "In cases of a certain kind, it is best to give water to a patient in an ague. All cases of ague are cases of a certain kind. Therefore, it is best in all cases to give the patient water."
Which sounds plausible, but isn't actually sound logic.
Right. It stumped the physician, confused him, and shut him up for a while. Gave the rest of the table a break.
And young Antony's reaction?
He was thrilled. So delighted that Philotas had silenced the annoying doctor, he apparently gave Philotas all the gold and silver plates and cups from the table as a gift.
Just like that. Casual extravagance seems to run in the family.
That's the impression these anecdotes give.
Yeah.
The source does note some of their activities were innocent enough pleasure trips on the Nile, parties on the harbor, but wholly unworthy to be made the serious business of life for people ruling kingdoms and commanding armies. That's the judgment implicit here.
And the fishing story. That's a famous one.
It's in this source, too. Antony's having bad luck fishing. Maybe he wants to impress Cleopatra.
He cheats.
Secretly gets his fishermen to dive down and attach fish to his hook.
Did Cleopatra fall for it?
The source says she totally noticed. But she played along, pretended to be amazed, expressed the greatest surprise and delight at his amazing skill and luck.
Huh. So she knew, but let him have his moment. Or maybe subtly mocked him by playing along.
It shows their dynamic, doesn't it? Playful, maybe manipulative on both sides. Definitely a performance element to their relationship, even in leisure.
These stories aren't just entertaining filler, are they?
No, the source uses them to illustrate character, the atmosphere of the court, the nature of their relationship. They give specific, memorable details.
They really bring the information to life, connecting back to Antony's known excesses and Cleopatra's reported cleverness.
Exactly. They flesh out the picture painted by the source.
Okay, well, we have covered a lot of ground here, sticking just to these source excerpts. It's amazing how much context they provide.
It really is. We started with Egypt's geography, that unique, isolated landscape. Then the paradox of the Ptolemies' cruel rulers, yet a prosperous state underneath, thanks to industrious people and working ministers.
Then Alexandria, that vibrant hub of commerce and learning, with its incredible library, tragically lost.
And the crucial early encounters with Rome. Cato's austerity, Caesar's commanding arrival and the conflict that followed, and then Antony's excesses setting the stage for Cleopatra.
By looking at the world around Cleopatra first, like this source does, you really get a sense of the forces at play, the history, the environment, the personalities that she navigated.
It provides a much richer understanding than just focusing on her actions in isolation.
Absolutely lays the groundwork. So let's leave our listeners with something to think about based only on what we've discussed today from this source material. Here it is.
Given the source's strong emphasis on how Egypt's unique physical environment shaped its society, and its principle that idleness breeds vice contrasted with the productivity of the working population, plus its detailed descriptions of rulers' behavior.
What does all that suggest to you about the balance between external factors like geography or social structure and individual choices or character when it comes to shaping history? How much is predetermined by the environment and how much is down to the person?
Something to chew on.